We've been talking the last couple of classes about the heart and the importance of intention and of being clear, being connected with our intention of what we're doing with meditation, what we're doing with our Dharma or our spiritual practice, what we're doing with our life. And the intention, the connection with the heart gives us a ground, to stand on. And without that ground, we get pushed around by the winds of daily life, by the constant shifts in our lives and the constant shifts in those things that are around us, that happen around us. So finding that ground is all important. We're all really looking for a safe place to stand, aren't we? We're all looking for a safe place to rest. And this teaching can seem awful paradoxical, because we're told that there is nothing to hang on to. We're told constantly that we need to let go of. We are told that holding on to self equals suffering, and all of that is true. All of that is true, but there is a place that these teachings are pointing to. There is a place that is free of all of the changes, all of the ups and downs, all of the experiences that we go through in our life. There is a place. Someone said in the last retreat that we had at the Dharma Center that they felt happy for the first time in a long time. And that happiness, there's a happiness that comes that's not dependent on external circumstances. There's a joy that comes along that's not dependent on external circumstances. And I think that's what we're all intuiting. I think that's what we're all moving towards. There is a happiness or a joy that's independent of what's happening to our body, of what's happening to our minds, of what's happening to our circumstances. And that can be a hard concept to grasp, but in the meditation practice, and I could refer back to the Anapanasati practice, that place where we start to become free of the 5 hindrances. We start to become free of the negative emotional patterns in the mind. And we have moments where we are able to experience the mind that's not caught up in any content at all. Right? That clarity of mind, that openness of mind, that emptiness of mind, emptiness in that the mind is not, the awareness is not identifying with anything that comes up. So the awareness, the mind is not identifying with anything that comes up in terms of our experience. And when we learn to develop that state, what comes from that is a quietness or a stillness, right? There's a quietness, there's a stillness that we begin to feel, that we begin to allow it to inhabit us. We watch the breath, we watch the mind, we watch how grabbing on to anything at all is creating suffering for us. So we learn to let go, we learn to let go, we learn to let go. And at some point, the mind is relatively quiet. The mind is relatively still. And we start to be able to put our attention on that. The space between thoughts. The space below the thoughts. The space that's there before thought appears and after it disappears. We get glimpses of this. We're able to reach this because our intention is strong. Most of us don't connect with this place until we've done some work. Because the conditioning, the habitual patterns of mind are so strong that that's where we spend our whole time. Like I was saying last week, we wake up in the morning, lying in bed, what's your thoughts? What's your thoughts? It doesn't take long before you grab onto some habitual pattern of mind, and your feet haven't even hit the ground yet. So through intention, through strong intention that we work with day after day, we begin to observe, we begin to develop calm, and we begin to observe the mind. We watch it very, very carefully, and we watch what we're grabbing onto. We watch the activities of the mind. And at some point along the way, the mind starts to become more quiet. Because we're not fanning the flames of discontent. We're not fanning the flames of impatience. We're not fanning the flames of fear. We're just watching. Whatever comes up, we're watching it. So through intention, through daily practice, through watching, then we start to connect. We start to see. We start to have a relationship with that which is not the content. That aspect of mind that's not the content. That's not thought. That's not emotion. We start to see that. We start to feel that. We start to be able to be with that. Sometimes we call it the witness or the watcher. And it's developed by watching your experience, watching our mind again and again and again. So we develop that capacity. And there's a quietness that starts to come through. And in that quietness, we start to discover a part of ourselves that is independent of anything that's happening on the outside. Anything that's happening in our mind, anything that's happening in our body, anything that's happening in the world around us, all of that stuff is happening. But there's a quality, an aspect of our being that lies beyond that sees that clearly. And in that aspect, there is a stability, there is a ground. There's a ground of being that's there. There's a seat there that's waiting for us to sit on. And that is joyful. That is love. That is compassion. When we connect with that and we start to pay more attention to that, then there's a happiness that comes from that lies beyond the ups and downs of our daily life. You've already seen it, I'm sure, in yourself through the practice, that your mind is starting to become more calm, and in a situation that you may have been very reactive in a few months or a few years ago, you find yourself in that situation again and you don't react. There's a calmness that's there. That's what I'm talking about. That's an expression. That's an expression of that underlying quietness. That is the mind not reacting. And the deeper that goes, the more we're able to work with that. Then the more we connect with that quietness or that stillness. And some days are better than others. Some things are easier to work with than others, right? Like, oh, I can be cool with this. I can be happy with this. I can connect with calm in this situation. I can connect with quietness or stillness in this situation. And then there'll be situations that come along that you can't. And that's our teachers. That's your teacher. We see where we get caught. We see where we get caught. We see where we're reactive. And we learn to see it coming. And sometimes it comes and hits us like a freight train, pulls us over. But if we've discovered that ground, then it's not so far away. It's not so far away. So even when we do have really strong reactions, even when we do have a difficult day, even when we are having a difficult time, we know in our hearts that there is something else that's there. And if we know that's true, and don't take my word for it, contemplate these words on your own and see if you can't, in fact, find the truth of this. But if you know that is true, then why are we spending so much time in other places? Why do we continue to go back to those places that just cause us suffering? And that's what we do, right? Almost like our reactions are our friends. Better the devil you know, as we say. Well, I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with being miserable. I think I'll just stay in this room. It's kind of truth in that for everybody. There's places that just we are so comfortable in, we don't even notice it. We don't even notice it. We don't even see what we're doing. So we start to see those places where we fall asleep. We start to see those places where we don't pay attention. We start to see those places that just cause us a lot of suffering. And we watch them. We know they're there when they're there. Just like in the Anapanasati teaching and the four foundations of mindfulness, when a feeling comes up, when an emotion comes up, we identify it and we feel it. We let, to the best of our ability, we don't go off on the narrative of that emotion, but we look at the feeling tone itself. We sit with that. You're upset? Okay. And then your mind's going to go off and tell you, oh, the reasons you should be upset. But that's not what we're doing here. We're turning the attention from outside of what we're upset with, who we're upset with. We're learning to turn that attention gently and kindly towards ourselves. And seeing what part we're playing in it. We're looking at these habitual emotional patterns that come up. And we're putting our attention on that. We're using those as our teachers. We wake up in the morning, we have an intention to be more kindful, more mindful, more loving person, a more aware person. Those are really good intentions. But how do we actually do that? By turning the attention back to ourselves. By looking at what's taking place inside us, not what's out there. And so we become more watchful, but in that we become more skillful. We become more skillful, we become more attuned. Become more attuned to what it is we're actually doing and how we're creating our experience. We're starting to see that we have choices. About where we go, about where we end up. About what we choose to hold on to, what we choose to move towards, what we choose to move away from. And it's not always pleasant, but it's necessary. But that's why we have the meditation. To develop that sense of groundedness, that sense of stability, that sense of calm, so we can see what it is this conditioned mind is actually doing. And where that practice leads to is a sense of calmness that turns into a quietness and a stillness. And we develop that. We develop that right in the middle of our day, right in the middle of your office, right in the middle of your kitchen. When we are watchful and we don't grab onto and we don't identify with, then that quietness, that spaciousness has a chance to shine. And that becomes our refuge. That becomes our ground. And it actually is our ground. We just don't know it. When the mind is perfectly still, perfectly quiet, and perfectly wakeful, then there's this openness, this spaciousness, this intelligence, this brightness of mind that's there. That's the other thing about the quiet mind, not the sleepy mind, but the quiet mind. There's an intelligence that is there, that's active. Do you ever have that where you have, I'm not sure if anybody else has had this, but where you have two opposing thoughts? I should be doing this. No, I should be doing that. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And you can't decide which one to do, if you should turn left or you should turn right. So what do you do with that? What do we do with that? If we can let go of the conflict and not try to figure it out in our heads, and if we could, I mean, we have the wisdom of it already, don't we? Oh, go to sleep on it, right? Just let it go and go to bed. Have a sleep. Let the problem go for a while. And if we can go into that quietness, then often the direction makes itself clear. I think we know that experience too. As long as we're caught up in our mind about whether we should be going left or right, if you should stay or if you should go, as long as we're caught up in that, there's no peace. But if we see that we're caught up in it and are able to let go of the two ideas and just let them go and just be, and learn to rest in the quietness, and from that space of quietness, that space of stillness, we can look at the situation and see it in an entirely new way, right? We know that experience. So there's a natural intelligence that's there. There's a brightness, there's a sharpness that's there. It's like, yeah, that's what I need to do. And we all have that. We all have that. We just get tangled up in emotions a lot of the time. So it's hard to see. It's hard to connect with. So learning to watch, staying clear with intention, learning to let go, and connecting with that quietness or that stillness in the mind. Connecting with that ground of being. That's not any of the activity, but the place in which that activity takes place, the space which that activity takes place. Connecting with that. So we do need to do these practices, right? We do need to do the meditation and the watching and whatever other techniques you may work with, working with the breath. But we should also just try to find it right now when you're moving through your day. Just finding it right in the present moment. Because you're not going to be in retreat most of your life. Most of us anyway. But where's that quietness now? Where is that place that's beyond all of this activity? In the Dzogchen teachings, in the Tibetan Dzogchen teachings, they talk about the pointing out instructions, and that's what the teacher points out the nature of mind. He's pointing out the ground, the very, very ground, the very base of awareness that is not content. And they're pointing it out. And the practices, they point it out, and the student just learns to work with that. It's traditionally, given, the pointing out instructions are given to people who've done a lot of practice. But even if you've done a lot of practice, you can still have a monkey mind. And there are people that haven't done a lot of practice and have had the pointing out instructions, but they remain the same. Looking at that space, looking at that aspect of awareness that is not content. That aspect of mind that is free and open. And it's a practice that we can practice anytime, in any situation. Right here, right now. That which is not content. That which is not thought, that which is not concept. And that's the refuge. That's the safe place. That's the safe place. Because it's not subject to change. Okay, why don't we sit a bit? And what we're going to do with the meditation this evening is we're going to, as usual, we're going to work with the breath, but then at some point, I want you to go right to what I've been calling choiceless awareness. Just opening up your awareness and just watching whatever comes up. Not grabbing onto it. Using the breath as an anchor, but just a sense of an open awareness. But before we get there, we start with the breath and we start with the body. We start with watching the breath. Then we open up our awareness to include the entirety of the body as the breath moves in and out and disseminates throughout the body. And then once there's a relative degree of calm, then we open up our attention to whatever comes up. If you find you're getting lost in thought, then you come back to the breath. But we're moving towards just a relaxed, open, present state of mind. Because if we don't grab onto it, whatever comes up in the mind, when we don't grab onto it, it just comes and goes. It's impermanent. But what's beyond that? What else is there? Thought comes and goes, sensation comes and goes, feeling comes and goes. But there's an underlying awareness that's there, isn't there? There's an underlying sense of beingness that's there. That's not part of all this change. That's part of something else.